Hey, it's Jer. From Detroit's historic North End, we're recording this on October 7th, 2020. On your Daily Detroit, technology expert Tom Lawrence joins me to cut through the clutter on a move by AT&T to no longer offer DSL service. It has a pretty big impact here in Michigan as their alternate service, fiber, is not available to most of their homes in service area. And considering everyone's working from home, schooling from home, it puts a number of communities at a big disadvantage. But to get started, I'll update you on a few stories to know around town. As we do the latest in COVID-19 numbers statewide, with just over 1,000 new confirmed cases and 9 deaths reported Wednesday, our pandemic totals sit at more than 130,800 cases and 6,847 deaths. Locally, cases per 100,000 people over the last 7 days are rising in all 3 counties, with Macomb at the lead of the pack. Meanwhile, according to their dashboard, the city of Detroit's 7-day case average is continuing to slowly decline, as it has since early July. Traditionally, they report their data separately. Although mask orders have been replaced by the state health department, as we reported yesterday, that does not mean the limbo their removal creates has stopped. MLive reports that local governments have been thrown into a gray area where they're not sure if they have to go back to in-person meetings. Credible medical experts agree that longer exposure times indoors, as is often the case for these meetings, increases the chances of coronavirus spread. So it's a patchwork response, with some entities deciding to go back to in-person meetings and others not. I will put a link to the story in the show notes. Also, I wanted to tell you about a free COVID-19 testing opportunity on Saturday and Sunday in Dearborn Heights. It's with the help of the Michigan National Guard and located at Hype Athletics. It'll run from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. both days. No registration is required, and that's this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, at 23302 West Warren in Dearborn Heights. Teachers in the Detroit Public Schools ratified a new 1-year contract this week with more than 3/4 of union members in favor. Most teachers would see a pay raise of 2.74% and a $1,500 bonus. Long-term substitutes and returning retirees can get a $900 bonus, and per-hour employees covered by the Detroit Federation of Teachers get a new floor of $15 an hour. New teachers will start out higher at $51,000 a year and $58,000 for those with an advanced degree. All of this will bring the average salary of Detroit teachers to among the highest in the state, at an average of about $70,000 a year. The new contract runs until the end of June next year, that's 2021. In the meantime, it's expected a multi-year deal will be negotiated. Multiple outlets are reporting that the Michigan Department of Corrections and the city of Detroit are being sued in federal court for requiring a Muslim woman, Zainab Shaban, to take off her headscarf when she was booked into the Detroit Detention Center back in 2018. At the heart of the matter is the Muslim belief that a woman should not take off her head covering in front of men who are not family. The incident is that a photo was taken during booking where allegedly 2 men viewed her in person. Her lawyer says she had to wear a bracelet with that photo around the facility as well. The Detroit Detention Center is a multi-government collaboration and is Detroit's central lockup. The MDOC says that it's the policy that all inmates get photos. Although Shaban was found not guilty of the charges against her, the photo is part of the public record. And there's the issue, in her opinion. The suit is to try and get police agencies to change how they handle these situations. For their part, the Detroit Police Department and the city responded to the lawsuit, saying they should not be a party to it as they don't take the photographs of people coming or going from the detention center. There's some more trouble in Detroit's Greektown neighborhood. WXYZ-TV and a number of outlets report that Detroit police are looking into 2 incidents. The first was where 2 people were shot at Beaubien and Larned. The circumstances around that are unclear as of this recording. The second was at St. Antoine and Monroe. There, 2 men got into a fight, and as part of an attempted pistol whipping, fired a shot that ended up going through a liquor store window. In the second incident, an arrest was made after the suspect left on foot, but the victim has not been found. I will put a couple links in the show notes to WXYZ and the Detroit News. Interestingly enough, I was in Greektown myself last night for ice cream and mini key lime pies at Astoria, and there were a lot of cops, but I happened to be out of there far before any of this all went down. The pandemic has clearly hit the businesses hard there, and despite announcements of new construction as well as increased police presence, The place is nowhere near its former foot traffic or vitality. Many of the storefronts are currently dark, and I'll be honest, it's kind of sad to see. I know the Greektown Association has plans to do more with the area, and it's probably time to put the gas on those. There has also been talk about closing Monroe Street. But what do you think? Many people have memories of Greektown being the destination back in the day. I mean, I personally remember the old Trapper's Alley. Call in your thoughts at 313-789-3211 or email me at dailydetroit@gmail.com. A quick reminder before we get to our conversation with Tom Lawrence that Daily Detroit is people-powered. Our members are who keep the lights on and get some great swag. They're also soon getting giveaways at least once a month from local businesses who really, they can't advertise, but they do want people to check out what they do, and I figured it would be a great way to have our members get something special. That's part of what's so important about becoming a member. Local reporting requires local funding, so join us at patreon.com/dailydetroit. That's patreon.com/dailydetroit, and thank you. A new study by the Communications Workers of America and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance raises questions about plans from AT&T to stop offering DSL broadband service to new customers. Instead, they're only offering fiber service. Now, at first you might think that's great, more speed. But the reality is the vast majority of their service area has no access to that product. And this study, and I will point out it's by a union and an advocacy group, claims that it'll be rural Michiganders, among others, that will be left with slow speeds or disconnected completely. And this is an echo of a digital divide that we've talked about here in the city of Detroit, where about a third of households don't have broadband of any kind. To break this down, de-spin it, and talk about what could be done next, Tom Lawrence from Lawrence Systems joins me virtually. Tom, how big of an issue are we talking about here, especially in this new work-from-home world?
There's a photo that went viral not that long ago of some small children sitting in a Taco Bell parking lot so they could attend online schooling. And that was a very visual representation of what we're seeing in the digital divide, where some of these kids, they know, especially when you deal with some of the poor families who have really realized education is the way out. And now education is somewhat unattainable for them because they don't have good broadband access. They don't have good internet access. The schools, I think, actually have done a decent job, I'll say, of getting computers in their hands, but now they need internet access to do the online and learning, through all these virtual things. So it's definitely a big piece of concern. And it's one of those, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, as we all know. So if you read one report, it'll say there's lots of access to broadband. Then you'll see another report that says there isn't. And this was covered a while back in the New York Times. And it's the way you want to slice things up. So if you say there's broadband because if I group together a group of cities that are outside of the main areas and say, well, these houses that are part of this downtown area of this particular rural city or township has internet. Well, that's enough for the FCC to count that as an entire city with broadband access, even though maybe 90% of the population doesn't live in that downtown area and doesn't have access. So it's hard to get the numbers exactly, but we are seeing it. And I see this from the perspective of we work with technology deployments for what they refer to as like wireless internet service providers, WISP markets. And we've worked with some of them, and we know that they're trying to figure out ways to get service to all these rural communities to very quickly here in 2020 went from we don't take the kids to school anymore, and now they all work remotely, figure it out. And they're like, we don't have internet at home. We just have some cell phones.
Right.
It's a hard problem to really get the solid grasp on. We need almost a better way to take a census data of this. But the problem is definitely there and definitely exists in these rural communities. It's just getting the actual numbers out of a census is a little bit challenging because of how people define these things.
Well, a national report kind of highlighted some of this this week from Ars Technica. The headline is AT&T kills DSL, leaves tens of millions of homes without fiber internet. And one of the things that caught my eye and why I wanted to talk to you, and this is a paragraph from it that I will quote, that there are 52.97 or 53 million households in AT&T's home internet service area, and nearly 15 million of them have fiber to the home access. But the fiber percentages were particularly bad in some states, and Michigan's rate was between 14 and 16%, which is ridiculously low as far as being able to get a hold of this internet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I say I'm from Detroit for people outside of Michigan, but I live in Southgate, Michigan. That's where my business is as well. You don't have to go very far. You can go to the next township, Sumter Township. You're talking about a 15-mile drive. And I have worked with several members of their city council. They have a challenge there where they can't get any type of not only not fiber, but there's areas that don't have access to Comcast internet or any of the other competing cable-based internet providers or even DSL. And some of the younger people on the city council have said this is a challenge because one of these old farmhouses or neighborhood projects that people look at trying to move into, if they can't get broadband, that means they may not want to move there. So some of the cities are trying to take a proactive role. But yeah, it's really strange because you talk about Sumter Township, you can look it up. It's all of 25 minutes outside of Detroit. And you're like, wait a minute, there's places 25 minutes outside of Detroit I can go live without internet. And of course, we've seen some of the areas that are outside of the downtown area of Detroit that they're only 6 or 7 miles outside of Detroit and have a struggle to get internet access. And the removing of these DSL is, going to be part of the problem.
Well, and in a previous report from the NDIA, they called out what they called digital redlining, where the richest inhabitants of cities are prioritized for fiber upgrades. And this new report found the same when it comes to rural areas. To me, it strikes me that this is an ongoing problem. Now, AT&T has provided statements to the press recently in response to this, saying that they do not redline, they do not do these things. And I want to be sure to share that side. They share that they've spent $125 billion in wireless and wireline networks, which also feels like it's kind of messing up some numbers here. You're kind of merging your cell phone and your hardline stuff. But it seems like this digital divide question is one that we have been talking about for like 20 years, Tom. Is there any kind of chance that this stops happening?
The one nice thing is the advancements in wireless. And you look at what they're doing over at Starlink, which is Elon Musk, one of his little things he's doing and trying to create more global internet. And this is not a new concept. This is something back in the early days of Microsoft, Bill Gates talked about was providing global internet. So we're going to see more advancements in wireless technology. Of course, 5G, which we've even talked about here on this show before, is another one. As they deploy these, this is going to make it easier because I will play a little bit of devil's advocate. And I understand some of the challenges when you talk about going from pole to pole to pole to physically wire something. And you take someone who has, or an area, I should say, someone who lives in these rural areas that have 20 houses across a 10-mile because of the spacing of the houses. And if it costs them $10,000, roughly what I've heard the cost to be to go from pole to pole to pole, and there's 20 poles in between, how are they ever going to get money back out of those couple houses they just lit up? So I'm hoping the demand and awareness and the combination of that creating more demand for these wireless technologies will advance them so we can kind of bridge that gap. I think it's going to be probably what happens sooner because honestly, wireless is still way easier than running wires from place to place to get it out to these distances. So I see where they can see it, that they're not redlining, but it kind of happened that way though, because it's just like, there's a business quotient here. I have to spend, $50,000 to get it out to one person's house. The lifetime of that person living there, they're not going to pay me $50,000 for internet service.
And the first line of their statement says, our investment decisions are based on the capacity needs of our network and demand for our services, which is exactly what you're talking about. I think I got a two-part question here. Can the advancements in wireless, especially if we could say do point to point, one thing that is people don't realize in downtown Detroit is that the Bedrock family of companies, they actually have point to point internet between their buildings going on. That happens with a number of buildings downtown. Can point to point wireless kind of be a partial solution for this, where maybe your point to point wireless one thing and then you're more of a LTE or something like that going forward? And then my secondary question, is this something that we need a grand plan like we did with electrification in order to make this happen in America?
It kind of feels like we might need that. So there's a debate you can go back and forth. So yes, point to point is a great solution. That's what the WISP companies are doing. And that does help. There are limits to it, but it's slowly getting there, and those solutions do work and they're functioning. Matter of fact, my parents who live in very rural northern Michigan, that's how they get their internet, is putting a giant tower on the top of their house because they live in a middle of nowhere type area, but that's the only way they can be online. The other side of a plan, there will be the arguments against it of that's the government getting involved in things, but we kind of have a problem that we created, and we can roll all the way back to the days of the great electrification. If the great electrification wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have had all these rural areas that have power. Well, it did happen. So now we do. Either A, we come up with a plan to bring all those people to live in a more efficient way closer where we can easily get them internet. That seems completely improbable and unlikely. Or we have the next Band-Aid on top of it and we put together a concise plan. We, as in government involvement in this, as much as people may not like it, in looking at ways that they can help subsidize this. Now, there's actually a lot of subsidizing for low-income families that Comcast does participate in when it comes to if you qualify for certain low income. That's a plan you can find for Comcast. That gets you discounted rates, but it doesn't necessarily solve the connectivity problem if they don't service your area. If we had something similar where we said, look, we got these people electricity, we can't figure out a way to get them all to move to somewhere where there's internet. So what about a plan to help subsidize some of these? Because there's a large, even when you're talking about doing a point-to-point system, that still has a large initial infrastructure cost, and being able to compensate those costs have challenges. With that being said, with companies like Verizon, they have received incentives to build out infrastructure that never got built. This is where the laws were created, and we had politicians pushing for this, but unfortunately they didn't put that little hook on the end of it that there was consequences if these companies didn't do it. They got slapped on the wrist for getting lots of discounts. So I think we need a better group of people, not your usual lobbyists who just basically give free tax breaks to these companies to create infrastructure that deploys, but for them to actually have an action plan, and those tax rebates come only after they've deployed.
Well, on top of that, I would add, though, that a lot of these internet service providers have actively lobbied and been successful in killing local municipalities bridging this gap themselves. I mean, these companies straight out wrote laws that were then copied and pasted to different states to make it so that, for instance, if you've got a Sumter Township, they can't get into the internet game because it's illegal. And like, that's something that is kind of stunning to me, where you basically grant a monopoly to these companies through this sort of situation, and then you take away the tools for a local government to do it. Doesn't it kind of mean then you've kind of kicked the ball up the chain to the state or the feds?
Yeah, I don't think there should be any blocking. We've seen Chattanooga, Tennessee, I believe, is one of the poster children for this, that have done a good job of providing internet at the city and municipal level and being able to create a competitive product that actually was affordable for people. And we've seen this work. We have Wyandotte, who's actually not done an absolute terrible job. They've done a mediocre job of deploying internet. They're actually adjacent to us here in Southgate. The only problem I have with the Wyandotte plan was they actually have blocked. They've done the opposite. The mayor decided to put in blocks for competition to come in. So Comcast isn't allowed in. Yeah, they basically played the game because they didn't want to have a competition problem. But I don't think there should be any bars against it. If the cities want to put their own plans together to offer access, the internet's becoming as vital as any of the other city municipalities. We've accepted that the power grid is something that's just part of essentially like a municipal service, even though it's run by private companies. We've accepted water and sewer are part of municipal services. It's just become so integrated into our lives. And even though it hasn't been around that long, which makes people have a different view of it, the internet's become kind of essential. It's how we file for taxes and unemployment benefits and most of our daily functions in life. It's just become this integrated part of everything. So it's kind of has to be treated like a utility now. There's going to be a lot of people that give me pushback against it, but there's a lot of evidence that says that's the way to handle it. And we've seen this work in other countries when you have it properly legislated, not a bunch of bad politicians involved, I guess you could say.
Well, Tom Lawrence, Lawrence Systems, you can find him at lawrencesystems.com. Thank you for helping navigate us through this and having a smart conversation. And I hope some people got something out of it.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Before I let you out the door, here is a fun and quick little piece of knowledge. The website Zippia.com has jumped into the battles of which Halloween candy is supreme in the state. A list from another service put candy corn at the top, but this map, Junior Mints reign supreme in Michigan. I personally endorse this choice as this was my dad's favorite, and engineer Randy co-signs this from behind the virtual glass. Associate producer Cheyenne likes both of them. But Sven wanted to share that, quote, don't talk about candy corn, unquote. So I won't. I'll leave it to you. What do you think? Leave a voicemail, 313-789-3211. And And that is all for your Daily Detroit. If you're hearing us for the first time, don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your favorite shows. Also, a big shout out to our new listeners on Amazon Music and Ghana. Welcome to the family, fam. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit. We'll talk tomorrow.